Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. What is echoing on me? Hush you. Okay. Today on the show, we're bringing back one of my all-time favorite people to talk tech with, Rich Harris. Rich, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I am also doing great, and my stuff is out of order, so I'm just going to drag them like this, and look how beautifully that works. I'm in the new system, y'all. We're live on all platforms here. I think we're on LinkedIn, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. Just throwing a regular old Svelte party. So, Rich, I imagine that most of the folks who are here have heard of you before, but just in case, for folks who aren't familiar with you and your work, do you want to give us the high level?
Sure. I am probably best known as the creator of Svelte, which is the UI framework that we're going to talk about today. I've had a career in open source going back to, I don't know, I think 2013 was when I first started putting things on GitHub, overcoming the stage fright of putting code out in the open. And I've just been tinkering away ever since then. The other thing I guess I'm known for is Rollup, the module bundler, which I created like 2015 and then left to smarter developers than me to maintain shortly after. And I work at Svelte. I'm an engineer at the Svelte. I work exclusively on Svelte, on open source, along with two other people working on it full time with me, Dominic and Simon, plus the rest of the open source maintenance team. And I've been doing that for 2 years. I just passed my 2-year anniversary at the Svelte.
Very good. All right, 2 years. That's I mean, that's a lifetime in web dev.
It is. It is. It's gone in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, no kidding. So I've been I would say casual user of Svelte. I've never become somebody who uses Svelte as my daily driver. I think more because I'm lazy and I already knew other frameworks rather than because of any actual preference. But every time I've used it, I've been super impressed with it. And it sounds like we're about to get like a absolutely massive improvement to what is already a very loved framework. So Svelte 5 is coming. It's not quite out yet, but it's in beta. Can you just maybe give us like the 10,000 foot version of like what it is and why you're so excited about it?
Whew, I can try. So Svelte 3 came out in 2019, first half of 2019. And that was a pretty radical departure from Svelte 1 and 2, which are sort of ancient history. Svelte 3 was where we basically set the tone of what it's like to write a Svelte component. Mm-hmm. And one of the big innovations there, aside from the fact that Svelte is a compiler that takes your .svelte files and turns it into a .js module, essentially, one of the big innovations was that Svelte 3 brought this concept of reactivity into the language. And what I mean by that is when you do, if you have a value called count and you have a button that increments count, then you do that by saying count plus equals 1 or count plus plus. Like it's just a variable that you're assigning. And the compiler recognizes that assignment and instruments it in such a way that it can then cause a re-render. And so because of that, you have this sort of very idiomatic, pleasing way of having interactive components. You can author things in a very concise, declarative way. You don't have the indirection of an API. You don't have any tricks involved. You're just dealing with the language itself. Mm-hmm. And so that worked out pretty well. We had a lot of nice features in Svelte 3. You've got like scoped styles. You can have CSS directly inside your components. We've got primitives for element transitions and motion and all of that other stuff. So it was like a pretty good and comprehensive framework. And then in 2021, we added a meta framework on top of that called SvelteKit. It's like the official way that we recommend that people build their Svelte apps. And that went pretty well too. And then a few months ago, we released Svelte 4, which was basically Svelte 3, but with some technical debt removed. Like we got rid of the common JS build, like stuff like that, just like shrunk down the package. But it was essentially identical to Svelte 3. And so we've had this framework. Apart from the introduction of SvelteKit, basically nothing has changed in Svelte since 2019, which, you say that two years is a long time in web development, but 2019 in the framework world is ancient history. So
for real.
Even though people tend to regard Svelte as like the new kid on the block, like a bit of a hipster framework, it's actually one of the most boring frameworks that there is. It has been unchanged almost completely in 4.5 years. Unheard of. In that time, we've learned a lot about the limits of the Svelte 3 approach. There are only certain things that you can do with compile time static analysis. There are certain ideas that actually don't quite work in that paradigm. And we had started to see that as people were building more and more complex apps, they were starting to hit some of these limits. At the same time, there was this larger conversation happening in the framework world around reactivity, mostly instigated by Solid, in particular Ryan Carniado on the Solid team, who evangelized this idea of signals, which, not a new idea. They had been around since the days of Knockout in like 2008, I think. But Solid sort of brought that into the modern era and really evangelized the benefits. One of those benefits is that you get really fine-grained reactivity. So instead of updating at the level of a component, which is what happens in React, or the level of a top-level variable within a component, which is what happens in Svelte, signals allow you to update a single property of a single object, of a single member inside a list, and it will only touch the DOM for that part. So signals give us this really nice performance characteristic, and they also solve some of the issues that we had seen with static analysis. So we knew that we wanted to move into this signal-powered world so that we wouldn't hit those occasional performance problems that we had with the Svelte 3 approach. So that was the background.
Okay.
And then a few months ago, Dominic Ganaway joined Vercel. He joined the Svelte team. And one of the things that he very much wanted to bring to the project was this idea of universal reactivity. Because I talked about how Svelte 3 introduced this idea of compile time reactivity. We're bringing reactivity into the language itself. And that's all well and good. But what happens is sometimes you need to have things that aren't inside an individual component. You have some state that is shared outside the component tree. You import it from a module. And the way that you've historically done that in Svelte is by kind of de-opting to this completely separate way of describing your reactive state. Svelte has these things called stores.
Right.
And what people have asked for and what Dominic really wanted, based on his experience of using similar ideas in other frameworks, was to have a way of using Svelte's reactivity anywhere in your app. And so much of the last several months have been spent brainstorming with the entire team, like, how can we design such a thing? And a couple of months ago, we hit upon what we think is the solution. And the solution is something called runes, which I guess we're going to talk about today.
Yes.
And so that is the big change of Svelte 5 is we're moving slightly away from compile time reactivity and into a more runtime flavored version of reactivity, which gives us all of these benefits. But there's some other stuff too. There's some new features coming in Svelte 5 that were pretty difficult to add before. And I guess we're going to talk about those too. And the culmination of all this, what all of this means in practice, is that Svelte 5 is going to be faster than Svelte 4. Your apps are going to be smaller than they are with Svelte 4. You're not going to hit these gnarly edge cases where you bump against the limits of compile time reactivity anymore. We have some new features. We've removed some of the weirdest parts of Svelte 4. And when I say removed, they're still there. You can still use them. Everything is backwards compatible, but they're deprecated, and we have replacements for them. And overall, the learning curve, if you're coming to Svelte for the first time, is going to be smaller than it was before. Svelte already had a pretty small learning curve, but it just got even smaller. And we've done all that, as I say, without introducing breaking changes. So I'm excited because it just feels like we're jettisoning a lot of the debt that we had accumulated. We're fixing some of the original design mistakes. And based on everything that we've experienced so far, as we've been building it, it's just a really nice framework to work with. And so I'm excited for people to start using it.
You know, the last time we talked, I think, was when Svelte 4 came out. You were on the show, and we one of the things we talked about was the kind of the design philosophy in Svelte, because I've always been impressed by the fact that Svelte isn't a hyper evolving framework. It doesn't feel like everything that I knew about Svelte last year is no longer valid because there's so many new ideas that are, completely orthogonal to the way that we would build things before. And like you said, like the things that worked in 2019 still work today in Svelte. So if you built a Svelte app, it still works. You've got backward compatibility. And this idea of like jettisoning a bunch of technical debt and other things as part of going to Svelte 5 is really interesting to me, because it's sort of like the image that I got in my head is when you watch a rocket launch and you see the kind of boosters, and as they break atmosphere, these big heavy boosters kind of drop off and you're just left with the actual spacecraft, right? And I think that's such a that's a cool way of thinking about it too, because it feels to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it feels to me when I look at Svelte and its evolution, that there has been a vision for what Svelte could be. And as the rest of technology has sort of caught up to how that thing can be made possible, you're just able to drop more and more custom code to get to the vision that you had with, browser APIs, with community submitted things, with these ideas like signals that seem to be kind of coming from all sides at once right now. Is that accurate, or is that me sort of as an outsider telling a more romantic story?
No, I think there's absolutely truth to that. Like a really good example would be the way that transitions are implemented in Svelte 3 and Svelte 4. If you have an element come into the DOM or leave the DOM and it has a transition applied to it, then what we'll do is we'll generate some CSS keyframes bespoke for that element. Essentially. So as your element is appearing, maybe it's just a simple fade transition, and we'll generate some keyframes that are like 0%, opacity 0, 10%, opacity 0.1, all the way up to 100% opacity 1. We will compile that into a big CSS string. We will put that in the DOM, and then grab the generated animation name and then put that on the element itself. Oh. And then in that way, we're able to have full programmatic control over the transition, but it's using CSS. And so as long as you're not using any non-compositable properties, then it will happen like fully off the main thread, blah, 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 like good for your battery, good for responsiveness, all of those lovely things. But it's hella complex, right? We've just had to jump through a whole lot of hoops to do that. And it's hidden from you. It's like all behind the scenes. You as the user of these things, you don't need to worry about that implementation until you do, because maybe you have some content security policies which don't allow arbitrary styles to be put in the DOM. Like at that point, it becomes a problem. But most of the time, you don't need to worry about it. We need to worry about it. We, the framework authors, we need to sweat blood and tears to try and get that to work reliably in all situations. Fast forward a few years, we now have this thing called the Web Animation API. And we can do those things directly from JavaScript without jumping through these hoops. And so because of that, we've been able to just get rid of all of the code that was responsible for creating those keyframes in favor of just using the Web Animations API, which is so much nicer. So absolutely, there are lots of cases where, things are kind of falling into place that allow us to get rid of a bunch of stuff. Like another one would be the fact that packages now can now use JavaScript modules, native JavaScript modules. If you create a SvelteKit project, it will be native JavaScript modules. What that means in practice is that your package.json has a type module thing next to it, and so everything that you import is also treated as a JavaScript module, unless you I forget how you enter CommonJS world, but like sometimes you can import a CommonJS module into an ESM module, but not vice versa. So if you start as ESM, then you can use everything. So because of that, because SvelteKit is the way to build Svelte apps, we can pretty well assume that if you're using Svelte, you are able to use ESM, or at the very least, you're using a bundler that understands ESM. And so because of that, when we shipped Svelte 4, we could just get rid of all of the common JS code. And what that meant was that we no longer needed to actually build the library. We don't need to have a build step before it goes on NPM. We just ship the source code directly there. We don't need to turn it from TypeScript into JavaScript. We don't need to create source maps. We don't need to have like your source folder and your dist folder and all of that. We just give you the very code that we wrote. And that is something that just wasn't possible back in 2019 when we shipped Svelte 3. So all of these things, it kind of slowly feels like they are coming into place. And we're just trying to evolve the framework in a way that feels like we're not hanging on to old things, but we're also not leaving people out in the cold if they have components that were written in the old world.
Yeah. Okay. So this is fascinating to me. And you said something like SvelteKit is the way to build Svelte apps, and that is kind of following the trend where it seems like the original plan or the original stated intent of the first frameworks that I really used in like any heavy way was we're building component frameworks. It was React in 2014, 2015, whenever it came out, was like we're building UI. These are little functions that return UI, and over time we've gone so all in on that as a community. Like we only write component based stuff. Like even vanilla JavaScript is like pushing toward like, can we just do component based stuff? And I think that's good. We've kind of standardized on a unit of building for the web, and it has also led to what seems to be that every framework has sort of required a meta framework to be able to do. I don't want to say this in a dismissive way, but it feels like serious work. Like there needs to be a meta framework of some sort in place, whether that's the blessed one like Svelte and SvelteKit, or whether that is a third party one like Astro, which can do Svelte components. It seems less and less common for something that starts today to be a like single page app that's not shipping SvelteKit for Svelte or Next for React or Astro for whatever your preferred front end framework is, Nuxt for Vue. Is that me in my Twitter bubble, or like are you seeing usage stats kind of bear that out in Svelte as well?
If it is your bubble, then it's also my bubble. I think that is basically true. Svelte certainly gets more downloads than SvelteKit. A lot of that is perhaps things that were built before SvelteKit was around. A lot of it is perhaps people using Svelte with things like Astro. Some of it is certainly people hand rolling their own solutions. Like for a long time, that was just how you did Svelte. But I think there has been a collective realization that if you want server-side rendering and code splitting and optimizations and TypeScript, and like you want your CSS to be properly bundled and like all of these things, you want a dev server, you want a CLI to connect all of this stuff together. Like, are you seriously going to build that yourself? No, nobody's got time for that. And what these meta frameworks do is they just encapsulate all of the commonality, all of the basic best practices stuff that is not unique to a specific app or a specific type of app. It's the stuff that pretty much everybody needs. And it just doesn't make sense to reinvent that each time. And beyond that, even we're starting to see that these meta frameworks are themselves being built on a common base, namely Vite.
Right.
Even Remix, one of the last big holdouts, is now a Vite-powered project.
And Angular
even
brought
framework
it in too.
Authors, right. Angular too. So as much as app authors don't want to have to keep reinventing the wheel, neither do framework authors.
Mm-hmm.
And so gradually there's this sort of layer of compacting and consolidation that happens, which is a good dynamic and one that we're definitely benefiting from.
Yeah, there's this joke observation. I don't even know what it is, but in the world of tech, it seems like we're in a wheel where the two phases of the cycle are bundling and unbundling. right? And we are currently in a bundling phase.
Yeah.
Like we're bundling everything. We're bundling our different apps together. Like every company is making a like data unification play. We're in a framework bundling phase where we're standardizing on tools like Vite after years of going really wide with how we want to solve these problems. We're standardizing on patterns, like we're seeing signals come together as like one of the patterns for modern web dev. It's showing up in just about every framework now. And I think, to me at least, that feels like a healthy cycle where we all spread out and we go as far as we can in as many directions as we can to observe what's possible given the current state of tech. And we start to find the bright spots. And then we all converge on the bright spots to build the best version of the thing today. But then the world keeps moving. And so we realize that the thing that was best yesterday is no longer the best thing today. So we diverge again and we start looking for new bright spots. And it's sort of, it's a healthy cycle. I think I had Ryan Florence talking about Remix, and he was describing it as like, it's not a circle. We're not going back to what we did before. It's an upward spiral where we keep examining new things with the progression of history supporting us and all the things we've learned since the last time we did this. So we're doing it again, but better. And that feels accurate. As in your mind, do you see any like, well, I'll ask you a very direct technical question because this is the only valid pushback I've seen against signals is like, as we're converging on these things, some of the primitives that we're starting to adopt, like signals, feel very much like power tools where like when you've got a reactive signal, it's, you can put it anywhere and it's reactive anywhere. And it starts to kind of like, this was one of the things that I think made it hard for people to pick up things like RxJS in the past, is that it felt like the signal could come from anywhere. And that made it a little hard to organize and maintain things. And I think we've seen similar pushback against some of the modern framework choices where it's like, we're giving people really, really, really powerful tools that require a significant amount of context and expertise to wield well. Do you see that as being are you seeing a similar risk? Like, do you feel the same way? And if so, how are you addressing that with Svelte 5?
Wow, there's so much to respond.
That was a hell of a statement. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I mean, I want to talk about the cyclical thing because like this is a super common misconception that people have. Like a lot of people think that it's just people, maybe who are new to the industry and weren't around for previous cycles, just like repeating the mistakes. Swix, Sean Wang, Swix, who used to be a well-known figure in the front-end space, but decided to decamp and become a well-known figure in the AI space. He has a quote about this that I really love. I don't know if it's his quote or if he took it from somewhere else, but it's something, maybe I'm going to get this wrong, but cynics see pendulums, builders see switchbacks. So like someone says, oh, you're just going from bundling to bundling, unbundling. But what is actually happening is we're climbing the mountain together. And at each point, so this is the unbundling phase, and then we get the bundling phase, and then with that shared foundation, we can do the next unbundling phase. And so like we keep sort of moving forward in that way, using each period of consolidation as the springboard for the next period of innovation. And that's like a super healthy thing that we should all want to try and be a part of. I get very frustrated when I see people on like Hacker News and elsewhere being like, oh, we were doing this before. Well, no, we weren't. We were doing like a very crude version of this in a completely different context. And this is new work, and it's valid work, and it's very healthy. So the signals thing, are they power tools? Are they overkill? I definitely understand the sentiment there, and I have seen the React team, for example, talk about how they really like the React programming model because you don't have your data kind of wrapped up inside these objects. Like maybe it's a function that you call that has another function for setting the value, like that's the signal way, or maybe it's more like Preact signals or views refs where you have a proxy or an object with getters and all of your state is contained inside those things. Like that is a layer on top of the thing that you actually care about, which is the data. And to the React team, that's unacceptable. They just want to be dealing with the actual values themselves, which is a position that resonates with me, and it's a position that I respect. I do think that signals are just a fundamentally better way of managing reactivity. And so one of the questions that we posed ourselves right at the beginning of our Svelte 5 design cycle was, how can we have all of the benefits of signals, but without sacrificing that really nice experience of just working with the raw values? And this is where runes come in, because a rune is a way of saying to the compiler, oh, hey, this value here that I'm declaring as a piece of state, like it's just a value. When I do let count equals $state 0, right, the value is 0. And later when I do count plus equals 1, the only reason that that's just not a normal variable assignment is because I originally marked it as a piece of state. But as I'm interacting with that thing, I'm just interacting with a regular old value. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds. You get the power tool, but you get to use it as if you're just writing very idiomatic normal JavaScript. And
got it.
To me, that is the best of both worlds. It feels really nice as you're using it.
Yeah. Okay, so we are about 30 minutes in, and I want to make sure we've got lots of time to actually see the code go here. So I am going to stop yammering at you and start asking you to teach me some stuff. Let me switch over into the coding view here. And I'm going to first do a shout out to the captioning. We've got live captioning right now. We've got Lee in here doing actual human live transcription that is available through this website here. You can hit that up. I'm going to figure out how to pipe it into StreamYard. Haven't done that yet. That captioning is made possible through the support of our sponsors, Netlify and Vetsu Code, both kicking in to cover the cost of human transcription. Thank you very much for that. Today, we are talking to Rich Harris. I don't know which social media network to link to anymore, so I'm linking to GitHub now. This is where we are.
Yeah. That's where the pod is at.
And I am also going to drop a link to Svelte. And that is actually the end of what I know about what to do next. So as somebody who is I've heard about runes, I'm super pumped to see how this works. I'm really excited about Svelte 5. What do I do first if I want to give this a try?
Okay, so first, I'm sorry, is it really loud? I think my neighbor is doing some DIY. I don't know if that's coming.
It's all right. It's coming through a little bit, but we can still hear you.
It's perfect timing. Okay, so if you're brand new to Svelte, then I would say just go to svelte.dev and start that way, and just pretend that we're not having this conversation, that you've never heard the word runes before, because we don't yet have comprehensive documentation for it. If you're an existing Svelte user, or like you really want to see what the new stuff is like, then the first thing I would suggest is going to the Svelte 5 preview site, which is svelte-5-preview.vercel.app.
Whoops, spelled that right. Okay, here is the Svelte 5 preview. I'm going to drop this in the comments here, and then I'll put this up on screen so everybody can get to it if you can't see the comments. And all right, we're in. Here we go.
Okay, so the first thing you'll notice is the big warning at the top: work in progress, expect bugs. This is not finished software. It's quite finished. It's mostly done. If you click on the status page, you can see all of the tests that are currently passing on Svelte 5.
So we're not even failing tests. We're just skipping tests. That's the only thing that's left.
Right. We're skipping tests that haven't yet been implemented because we want it to pass CI, but ultimately we want to get no skip tests. Mm-hmm. So there are some things that have yet to be finished, but we've tried it out in a few of our own apps, and it's basically a drop-in replacement for most things. There's also a link to the docs up there, which outline some of the new stuff, if you want to read about it. But the main page, if you click on the Svelte logo to get the editor, that's where you can actually start playing with the new syntax and the new features.
Okay. I'm being told that our mics are a little different audio wise. Are y'all getting a volume difference?
If I bring my mic closer, is that a little better?
Let me just let StreamYard do the volume adjustments for both of us, and that should bring us pretty close here. Somebody let me know in the comments if that is still notably out of whack volume wise. No issue on your side, Big Diff. All right, so we're gonna roll. Okay, good, cool. So got the docs. Docs links are in the chat. I've got the playground up here. By the way, I love this playground, and I love that we've seen, I don't know if y'all were the first ones to do this, but I love that just about everybody seems to be picking this model up now, because I really, really like the idea of learning by doing. I'm actually doing a consulting project with a startup right now, and the first thing I suggested was like, no, your onboarding has to be like, give them broken code and walk them through fixing it. Don't just show me the code. Because I think it's such a good model of learning.
It's also a fantastic tool if you're building something like Svelte. If you can give people a site where they can try something out, and then if it doesn't work, instead of asking them to like describe what didn't work or send you a Git repo that you need to clone or paste in reams of code into the issue, they can just share a link and we can start diagnosing it straight away. So this saves us more time than it cost us to build it in the first place, I think.
Excellent. Okay, so before we got on, we had pre-gamed with a couple ideas, and there were several things that we had talked about doing. So one was climbing in here, looking at runes. Another was you had mentioned maybe refactoring a Svelte 4 component into a Svelte 5 component to show the differences. And then I can also just pull up the terminal and spin up a brand new Svelte 5 beta project. What do you think is the best place to start if we're going to write some code?
Well, let's have a look at what we've got on the screen
Let's
now,
do it.
because this is like super simple, isolated, and we can talk about the different features individually. So what we're looking at here is like sort of the hello world of interactive components. We have some reactive state, and if you click on the button, then it's going to increment that state.
Sorry, I just tried to inhale my coffee. Okay, I'm good. Button's working. I'm crying a little bit, but it's not because of the Svelte. Okay.
So for people who are familiar with Svelte 4, this will look mostly the same. The one difference is that on line 2, we have let count equals $state 0. And previously, we just did let count equals 0.
Right.
Anything that was declared at the top level of a component, if it was mutated or reassigned somewhere, and it was referenced in a reactive context, like the template, then we would turn that under the hood into a piece of reactive state. So it was all sort of implicit in magic. And for the most part, that works really nicely. Like you just don't have to think about it. It doesn't scale to when you want to do that sort of thing inside functions or inside JavaScript modules. So with the state rune, we are explicitly saying to the compiler, this is a piece of reactive state. And that's really helpful for the compiler to understand your intent. And it's also helpful for the person reading the code because it's a lot clearer what they're looking at. And it allows the compiler to give the developer certain hints around how to use it correctly. So if you look at if you click on the JavaScript output tab there, you can see how it's actually working. So that increment handler is the first thing that we see. It's been hoisted to the top because we do event delegation and it's more efficient to just have the handler in one place. Mm-hmm. And you'll see we're doing this $set and $get stuff. And that is a rewrite of count plus equals 1.
Got it.
And count in that context is something called a source, which is a type of signal. Mm-hmm. And if you scroll down to where we're declaring it, you'll see that we're first opening our component with that push thing. And then we're saying let count equals $.source and then providing it with its initial value. So inside this compiled JavaScript, if you reference count, then you're going to get that source object. But anytime you reference count inside the code that the compiler converts, you can just reference it as a value. So if you keep scrolling, then you'll come down to where we have this thing called a text effect. And what this is a function that will populate the text inside the button with the current value of that source signal. And the way that signals work is when these effects run, we say, oh, hey, this is the current effect that's running. And anytime we do $.get and then pass it a source, that central entity is like, oh, hey, so this effect is one of the things that depends on this value. And so later when we do $.setCount, that effect, that text effect, is one of the things that needs to rerun. And so that's how signals work.
Great. Okay. So seems like a fun project for somebody who's trying to learn this stuff to just dive into the Svelte internals here and start to, one of the ways that I actually learned a lot of the more complicated JavaScript that I know is early in my career, back in probably early in my JavaScript career, I re-implemented the React VDOM reconciliation from scratch by referencing their code base because it helped me really internalize the mental model of how this stuff works. And looking at how, like, if you're looking at this and it just makes you want to kind of go cross-eyed and give up, take a look, because the code's not magic, right? Like, it's complex. There's a lot going on, but it's not something you can't write yourself. So go in, reverse engineer the source code. And now y'all have even, you've made your source code even more approachable, I think, right? Because you're back to plain JS. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't even need special tooling. You can just rely on JS doc and whatever editor you want and go play in there and figure out how it all works.
Yeah. And that's important to us. Even though there's some magic that's happening, right? This compiler is taking your assignments and it's turning it into something else. Like that's magic. We prefer to use the word magical. It's a magical experience. But what's happening is not mysterious. We're showing it to you. This is what the compiler is doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just doing the grunt work that computers are good at, so that you don't have to. So you get the nice experience without any kind of mysterious, like, I don't know what's happening here, stuff going on behind the scenes.
I like that. That is, this is slick. Like, I also do really like that you're showing the output. It demystifies things a little bit. It gives you a thread to tug at if you're trying to understand how it works under the hood. I never would have thought to like dive in here if I couldn't just look at this output, because I'm not going to look at the minified source code that gets spit out by the compiler. But this is great. Like, show it to me in the browser. Give me a thread to tug at. That's super fun and a great learning opportunity. So, okay, is there anything else you want to dive into here?
Yeah, let's add another piece of code here. Okay. So we've seen the state rune. Let's talk about the derived rune. Very often in your components, you will have some stuff that is dependent on other pieces of state. And we can do that here by adding, let's say, let double equals, and then start typing $derived. Should let you autocomplete. There we go. And then do count times 2.
Okay.
And then somewhere inside your component, you can say doubled is
double. All right. Now, an important thing to note here is that I don't write Svelte every day. And this was intuitive enough that, like, once Rich told me what the function was called, or like what that this is what it is, everything else just makes sense in my head. And I think that's a good sign for an API when you're brand new to it and you can just kind of go, I know what I'm doing here. I know what happens next. So that is great. That makes me really happy to see.
The third rune that comes after state and derived is the effect rune. So this is sort of the trinity of signals. You have your sources, you have your derived state, and then you have the things that happen when either of those things change. So everything below the script, like everything in that template area, this is inside something that we call a render effect. But you can also add your own effects. If you want to log out the value of count and double every time they change, then you can do that by saying $effect. And then inside there, console.log those values.
There we go.
And so this is code that will run after the DOM has been updated. There's another version that will run before the DOM has been updated if you need that, but typically you don't. And it allows you to do things like, I don't know, analytics, or you can interact with third-party libraries, or you can measure the DOM to see like how large an element is, if you need to position something. All of those sorts of tasks you can do inside effects. This is kind of similar, I guess, to React's useEffect, except that there's no dependency array, because we know from the fact that you're reading count and double inside the effect that those are the dependencies.
Got it. There's a question here about effect, and the question is, could effect do the same thing as derived? And I'm not sure what that means.
So I think I know where that is coming from. In Svelte 4, we didn't have a separation between derived and effect. It was it was kind of strange in retrospect, but it sort of felt like this just sort of worked, so let's go with it. In Svelte 3, instead of having this derived rune, we had something called the dollar label. You do $:double equals count times 2. And the compiler would look at that. It would see that everything inside that dollar label was referenced inside the component. And it would say, okay, so this statement depends on the value of count. And so whenever count changes, we'll rerun this statement and reassign that value to double. And then if you had something else that depended on the value of double, then it would run after double had been updated, and so on. So that was how we did derivations in Svelte 3. Well, of course, if you're just logging something, $:console.log count double, then even though you're not assigning anything, that's still code that depends on those values. And so it's still code that Svelte is just going to run after those things have changed. And so we had derived and effect with the same syntactical construct, which, like, not because we planned it that way exactly. It just sort of worked and we went with it.
Okay.
But what we've found over time is that tends to yield confusion, partly because when you have side effects, you generally want those to be after the DOM has been updated. You don't want those to happen before the DOM has been updated. So it's helpful to have a separate thing that says this is going to happen after the DOM has been updated.
Gotcha.
But also, it's just a little bit weird to look at code and be like, oh, this is something that depends on that, and this is something that happens in response to that. There's this concept in programming called command query separation. It's one of my favorite pages on the C2 wiki, which is basically, some function calls in your app are do something functions, and some functions are return something functions, and you mix and match those at your peril. And we were mixing and matching those, and we're now saying the return something type is your derivation, and the do something type is the effect. And that separation is much cleaner. If I had my druthers, I would enforce the command query separation at the level of the underlying programming language. Like, I think it would be hugely beneficial if instead of saying, const total equals add AB, and then console.log AB, like the same syntax for these two completely different concepts. Like, what if it was run console.log AB or something like that, to force you to differentiate between commands and queries? That's
Gotcha.
a whole separate tangent. We can't do that. We can't change the JavaScript to enforce that, but we can change Svelte. And so that's what we've done. In line with other frameworks, React has useState, useMember, useEffect. Solid has create store, create computed, create effect. We now have state derived and effect. And as a result, components are just a little bit easier to understand.
Okay. And so effect is one of those words that it has many permutations across different frameworks. So there are a couple questions in the chat about this. One is what is the similarities and the differences between useEffect in React and effect in Svelte? Like I noticed, for example, the first thing that jumped out at me, I don't have a dependency array. Is that an issue in Svelte? Like, is that a thing that I need to think about or care about?
No, it's all derived from usage. So the dependency, the list of dependencies can actually change between runs. If you have something like if foo then bar, well, if foo is false, then you don't care about bar. So bar can change all it likes. And as long as foo is false, we don't need to rerun that effect.
Right.
There's no way to express that concept when you have a dependency array, or as in Svelte 3 and 4, when you're determining those dependencies using static analysis at compile time. But if it's determined at runtime, the way it is in Solid and the way it is in Svelte 5, then you don't have that problem.
Got it. Okay. And so I think one of the biggest points of confusion for a lot of developers around effects has been, I mean, I live in a largely React bubble, and so I see a lot of confusion around useEffect because it's sort of become the function to do everything in it. And so when we're looking at Svelte, like if I'm going to do DOM interaction, if I'm going to bring in GreenSock for an animation that I want to put on my homepage, if I'm going to make fetch calls, if I'm going to do any of this stuff, I'm probably reaching for a useEffect in React, which can lead to some fairly confusing outcomes. If you don't understand, double rendering and things, it can just kind of trick people into thinking their stuff is broken in dev mode, or, not adding a dependency array, getting infinite loops. How does Svelte approach this same thing? Like I know animation is kind of a first class component of Svelte. So maybe that one's not a good example, but like when we get into writing fetch calls, what's the pattern in Svelte, and like how do we avoid some of that confusion that we get where we're kind of using one escape hatch for everything?
So I think some of that is excuse me. I think some of that is intrinsic. As soon as you start using effects, you are kind of breaking out of the declarative paradigm to some extent. You're sort of taking the reins from the framework and you're saying, okay, I'm going to decide what happens now instead of letting you control everything. And so inevitably, that creates the risk of complexity. There are, for some of the examples that you gave, there are mitigations. So the infinite loop, for example, well, Svelte will track infinite loops and it will say, oh, this effect keeps rerunning. That's probably not supposed to happen. So you might need to rewrite this code.
Okay.
It'll do that in development mode so that you can fix those. For the animation, as you noted, we have animation primitives built in. So you're less likely to need to use effects in that context. And for the fetch thing, I think this is where the meta frameworks really come into play, because generally speaking, you shouldn't be fetching data inside an effect. Data is something that should be handled outside the component and passed in. Or, in the React server components world, where you have async components running on the server, like you have the data fetching inside the component and then you sort of send it to the client in the separate step. We don't have a concept of server components. Instead, we have this idea that your data tree is this kind of parallel thing to your component tree that resolves first, and then we pass the data into the components. And so we can do all of the async stuff there. We can do your data fetching there. And that way, we're not relying on effects, which are much harder to orchestrate across multiple components. And so I think the overall takeaway is effects are extremely necessary. You cannot have a framework that does not have a concept of effects. But we can say this is like special occasion food, right? This is not right. This is not our rice and beans. This is like our our chocolate sauce. So you only use it when you've earned it.
Yeah, right. You can't have any effects unless you eat your meat. I get it.
And we'll actually, if we do that component conversion that I was talking about before, we'll actually see an example of this, and hopefully I'll be able to explain a little bit better what I'm talking about. The more that you can do with state and derivations, and just have things expressed as data flowing through your application, the better a time you're going to have.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, that definitely makes sense. And I think this is also just one of those things that, like, this is the skill these days is learning to think in these different modes of, like, what are you doing inside of your app? When are you working with the framework? When are you stepping outside of the framework? And how do you make sure that you're not stepping outside of the framework in an unnecessary way? Because I think that, at least to me, that seems to be where I see the most pain is where people are, like, they're opting out of the framework way of doing things, and at the level that they're doing it, it's almost like, well, okay, but why are you using a framework at all if you want to do this thing like this? Like, you're just, like, fighting the tools now. Like, if you just want to fight the tools, just don't use the tools. So I do, I think this is really fascinating, and I'm really excited to see this refactor. So if I want to do this component refactor, where should I go to grab that component?
All right, let's create a new SvelteKit app.
Okay, I'm going to just create a new one of these. Close this one down, make this one bigger, and we're going to get into here. And all right, so I want to create a new SvelteKit project, and I do that with npm create svelte.
Svelte at latest, just in case there's something cached somewhere.
Okay, and
then you can either give it a directory name now, or in the next step, if you want to call it, like, install that.
And we're going to call this, let's see, I'm going to call this, are we going to create a second project for Svelte 5, or are we going to work entirely in this one, do you think?
We're just going to work in this one.
Okay, so let's go with Svelte 5. We're just going to call it Svelte 5.
We'll do the demo app for this.
Okay.
And then up to you if you want to use JavaScript or TypeScript. I tend to use TypeScript when I'm building an app.
Okay. Let me make this bigger so I can see what's going on.
Yeah, it looks like some stuff's getting missed there. I'll generally add prettier when I create a new app. I don't care about ESLint, and we're not going to add tests, so we can skip all that. Yeah. And then if you go down to the bottom there and hit space, then we can install the Svelte 5 beta.
All right, so we're going to move in, and I'm going to npm install.
Yeah.
And then I'll just get init, and we're going to npm run dev. And that opens up on 5173. Great. All right. I am in SvelteKit.
All right. So I can't remember if we enable this in the config by default. Try doing Command Shift over the window and see if that brings up the inspector. If not, then we'll have to enable it.
Let's see, Command Shift.
No, it doesn't seem to be installed. So we'll do that as a first step, because it's something that I really love. So go into your Svelte config.js there.
Okay.
And actually no, sorry, it's the vite config. And then under sorry, I'm just Googling because I've forgotten how to do this.
I get it.
Since I said a SvelteKit project, because all my time is spent on on Svelte itself these days. Okay, no, so I was wrong. It's inside the Svelte config. This is worth it, I promise. It's a little bit of a digression, but it'll be worth it. Add a new field at the top level. So underneath Kit, just add a Veep plugin, capital P, and then inside that, add a property called Inspector, true.
Oh, here. Inspector, true. Okay, and then is it going to auto restart for me, or it already died?
Yeah, we already killed it. Okay, so if you refresh that page, and now try the Command Shift thing.
Command Shift. Am I hitting the right button? I am not 100% convinced that I'm. See, this is.
Maybe.
Is this Shift? Yes, that's Shift. Command Shift. It might be my keyboard, but I am not getting the shortcut. Let me reload. Actually,
that is too bad.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it.
Oh! You know what? I see the error message in the console. This is my bad. So this is a thing that works through Veep plugin Svelte on Svelte 4. It does not yet work for Svelte 5 because you haven't added support for it. I should have realized that. So what it is, I can explain what it is and why I get so excited about it. It's this integration that that was built by Dominic Gerpel, one of the Svelte core maintainers, who is also a big contributor to Veep.
I've seen this. This is the one where you can like click on something and it opens it up in your editor?
Yes.
Oh, so it's so good. So
you can
good.
Inspect your component tree. You just tap on it and it will just open it right there in your editor. It will go to the very line of the element that you're trying to edit. And it's good. Really beautiful. And it's perfect for demos like these, unless you're using a beta version and it doesn't work. Never mind. Anyway, so let's open the counter.svelte component. So just do Command P and then start typing the counter. All right. Another thing that doesn't work is HMR. So normally if I was demonstrating SvelteKit to someone, we would like try editing a file and then saving it and it would just magically update in situ. HMR is not yet implemented in Svelte 5. Obviously it will be by the time we ship it. But for now, we're going to just have to reload the page like cavemen.
It's all right. I'm ready. I got my shortcut fingers warmed up.
All right. So let's convert this component. Well, actually, first let's interact with the component. Press those plus and minus buttons a little bit, and you'll see that we've got this. And if you really spam it, then you'll see it. It behaves with some like nice spring physics, essentially. And the way that is implemented, we can see on the right we have a piece of state which is count, and then we have a thing called displayed count, which is a spring value.
Okay.
And displayed count is something that we call a store. A store is, as I was saying earlier, we have this way of representing state that isn't component state. We use stores for that.
Okay.
And a store is just an object with a subscribe method that gives you the current value. And so on line 7, when we say displayed count set count, what we're saying is whatever the current intermediate value is, like say it's currently like 0.3 and we set it back to 0, then it will start going back down instead of continuing its upward path to 1. And then further down in the component, you can see that displayed count is being used somewhere with displaying those digits inside the component. Yeah, and it's translating the whole thing based on the modulo of displayed count and 1.
Got it.
Right, so it's just like a nice little way to get some spring physics into our component. And then you can see below that on line 8, we have this offset equals modulo displayed count and 1. So line 7, this is what I was talking about before with this distinction between derivations and effects. Line 7 is effectively an effect because we're doing something. We're saying displayed count dot set count. Line 8 is a derivation. We're saying whatever the value of displayed count is currently, offset is derived from that.
And
obviously
so
the let count on.
So to let me work through my mental model of this and make sure that I understand what's happening, because originally I would have thought both of these were derived values, but now that you say it, I understand. So I'm going to repeat it back to you. Here we're setting state. The state is 0, and we can increment or decrement that. We've got it set here. Offset is whatever the difference is between the current value and like whatever is being displayed and the like plus or minus 1.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's used for positioning.
And this displayed count is an animation value, which is something that has to happen after the render. So we're setting our state, we're determining the derived state, and then once we've made the DOM updates, we are changing the spring value so that we can animate between where we were and where we are. So that's why this is an effect and this is derived.
Yes.
And my poor little brain is broken because they look like the same thing to me.
Well, I mean, they kind of are. And someone in the chat actually noticed, like, why can't line 7 just be $: displayed count equals count? And it sort of could be. That would work. You could do that. But it's this kind of weird, ambiguous case because the displayed count is not equal to count. When we do .set count, even though $displayed count equals count would compile to the same code that we currently have on line 7, it's actually not the same thing. We're not saying that displayed count equals count. We're saying that displayed count is this intermediate value which periodically we give it a new target, and it's constantly trying to make its way towards that target, if that makes sense. So it's really more of a side effect than it is a derivation, but it's this kind of ambiguous case. So how do we refactor this into Svelte 5?
Okay.
Well, first of all,
I think I can refactor part of this on my own. So let me try. I'm going to go with, we want let offset equal derived. And then I want that to be modulo displayed count 1. Okay, so that's my first set here, and then I'm going to put these back in order, I think. Yeah, nope, still mad at me.
Yeah. So
because we switched to runes mode.
Because we switched to runes mode. So notice that the whole thing, even though it's written in the Svelte 4 style, it continues to work because basically everything in Svelte 4 just works in Svelte 5. So if you have existing components, then you can mix and match those with new components written with runes, and it's totally fine. But yeah, you did that totally right. You turned that into an effect.
Okay.
But there's one missing piece, which is now that we're in runes mode, let count equal 0 doesn't mean the same thing anymore.
All right. So we need to go state equals 0. Like that?
Yeah. And then hopefully, if you refresh the page, that will continue to work.
And it sure does. Okay. All right. No, this is good though, because now I think like this to me makes sense because I've got my displayed count here. Like if I was organizing this in my own code base, I'd probably end up with something that looked kind of like this, where I've got my displayed count, I've got my count in state, we're deriving the offset, we are updating the displayed count in an effect, we've got this modulo function to help. And now like my brain is less broken here. I'm one of those people who I like to see things declared before I use them. So like this is how I would organize this code. And then this makes sense to me. It's very like, all right, I got it. We're deriving values, we're updating things when the DOM changes, like after the DOM renders, and now I know what's going on with a little less like, wait, what does that $: do? I think this feels good.
There is a bug though. If you refresh the page and pay close attention, you'll see it.
Oh, we get not a number.
Flash of Nan? So that is because the flash of Nan, the wrath of Khan, the flash of Nan. The reason that happens is because there is a little bit of a difference between how the $: statement works and how effects work. In Svelte 4, if you have a $: label, that code will run on the server as well as in the browser. In Svelte 5, we do things a little bit differently. The derivation will be calculated on the server because obviously we need that in order to server render any HTML. But effects are typically something that only needs to run in the browser because it's interacting with a DOM element or something like that. And so we have this situation where the displayed count is initially undefined. And so the things that you see in the template, it's doing math.floor and math.ceil on an undefined value, which is giving us nan. And so that's why you see nan in the template. And so we actually need to initialize our displayed count with the state value.
Okay, so then that means I would go here and I would, can I just drop it in like that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You can, and it'll work now. Like if you refresh the page, then it will be correctly rendered, but you're getting this warning.
I'm getting a warning. Did I mean to reference it inside of a closure? So does that mean like a closure just like this? Nope, that's not right.
That is what it means, but that would give you a worse problem. So this is probably a little overwhelming to someone who is just like, I just want to learn about runes and everything. But I wanted to bring it up because it's a good encapsulation of the difference in philosophy between Svelte 4 and Svelte 5. We kind of ideally don't want to think about this in terms of effects. As we were saying before with the whole, you can abuse effects and you get into a really complicated place. And like, is this actually an effect or is it a derivation? It's a little bit ambiguous. We want to be able to express things as far as possible just in terms of state and not overuse effects for this sort of thing. So ideally, the way that we would express this is we would have a rune-based equivalent of the spring, and you would initialize it, and then you would pass in a closure that read that value. So you would do something like const displayed count equals spring, and then you would pass in that parens arrow count arrow function that you just created before, and then inside the template you would reference displayed count dot value, and so you would have the read-only view onto the in-between version of that count, and every time you update count, that updates. But if you're not updating count, then it will just stay at the initial value the whole time. And that way you don't have this weird distinction between like derivations and effects. Everything is just data and it's just flowing through naturally, and you wouldn't see that warning anymore, which we've put in place to prevent people from accidentally using state in ways that they probably don't intend. Sorry, that was a lot. I hope
that was a lot. And I'm not quite sure I picked up what my action step is here.
So the action step is wait for us to implement a better way of handling this stuff.
So I
really
guess
what
then
this is showing is that there is this kind of impedance mismatch between the state-based way and the store-based way, and we want to fix that by embracing the state-based approach as much as possible.
Got it. So for the time being, this is a warning, not a bug. It'll work, but it can and will, it sounds like, be better.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Most of the time, if you're referencing state inside the scope where the state is declared, not inside a function, then that's a mistake because you're only going to reference the initial value and it's never going to update. And if you're not referencing state for its current value, then what are you doing? So generally speaking, if the compiler sees something like that, it's going to say, hey, you might want to check this. I'm going to allow it. Like, I'm not going to stop you from doing this, but you might want to check this. In this context, there isn't really an alternative to how we've done this, but the compiler is saying, hey, this looks a little bit weird. Did you mean to do this? And that is because we haven't yet finished building the set of tools that would enable you to build this component in the best possible manner.
Well, I guess like the other way that we could solve this, I suppose, is we could just have double magic numbers.
You absolutely could, or you could have let initial count equals count. Although I suppose that would get the same warning. But yes, there are workarounds.
Yeah. And so it seems like, this is fine. This gets us where we want to go. But yeah, for all the reasons you stated, I am excited to see how you encapsulate the runes philosophy into the Svelte motion tools. That's going to be really cool to see.
Yeah. And when we talk about like having reactivity in the language itself, that little warning there that's telling you that, oh, you might want to do that a little bit differently, that is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. By having this concept of state be in the language, we're able to understand the intent of your code to a much greater degree than we otherwise could. And because of that, the compiler is able to say, oh, hey, I think this was probably supposed to be done a little bit differently. And this is just one example of us leveraging that idea. I expect we'll find many more over time. And I'm just like really interested and excited to see what it will mean to have these concepts built into the language.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's going to be extremely cool. Okay, so we're in a project. We are writing code. One thing that I would love to see is now that we're in SvelteKit, right? Are we in SvelteKit?
We are.
Okay, so now that we're in SvelteKit, I had talked about like what's the right way, quote unquote, to like fetch data in an app to load things in. Can we look at that?
We absolutely can. Maybe if we look at the Svelte app, that'd be a good way to get a handle on this.
Okay, so here's the Svelte app, and we'll just. Oh, it almost fits. I can't spell is why that didn't work.
What about learn? Since this is learn with JSON.
Okay, so we got one. Is this?
Yeah,
is that
the E is in. It's the right letter, wrong place.
Right letter, wrong place. Okay. I'm not going to burn time actually playing this. If you haven't seen Wordle, it's you just guess letters, guess words. This is great. Okay, so this is cool. And then to load this, do I go to Svelte? Okay, so we've got our routes. Okay, can I take a little like detour before we talk about Svelte itself?
Please do.
Okay. Where did the pluses and stuff come from in file name? Because I ask because I think file-based routing is probably one of my favorite things that I've seen in frameworks, and I love it so much. And I just haven't seen this convention before. So what led to the choice to put the pluses in? Because for somebody who's not in the Svelte world, this feels really different compared to what else I've seen.
Yeah. It's something that we spent a lot of time figuring out the right way to do this. For a while, we had an index.svelte convention. And if you had, so you see there's an about root there. We have a plus page.svelte inside the about root. For a long time, we had about.svelte. So you'd have index.svelte and about.svelte. And the index.svelte would be the slash root, and the about.svelte would be the slash about root. Nice and intuitive, great, cool, whatever. But what happens when you have a component like that counter component? Does that become slash capital C counter? How do you differentiate between root components, root files, and the components that are consumed by those root files? And so we started having all of these elaborate rules like, oh, maybe if it has a leading underscore, then it doesn't become a root. Or maybe we have a configurable way to say these files are private and these files are public. And it actually doesn't scale all that well. And so we were kind of aware of this problem, although we weren't actively looking to solve it until the next team shared their vision of how the app router was going to work. So they have a similar concept where roots are defined by directories rather than files. And inside those directories, they have a page.jsx and like a error.jsx. And all of these different files have like special names that allow you to have loading screens defined declaratively, your data loaders defined declaratively, your actual components defined declaratively. And it just solved all of these problems in a really obvious way. But I don't think it solved it all the way. Because if
if I have a component called error, it clashes.
Yes, but even if you don't, even if you know all of the special names, then you're probably going to have some files in that directory which are used somewhere in that root, which like lexically are between the special files. So you have an error page, and you have you have the error.jsx and you have the page.jsx. Like in the middle, maybe you've got like helpers.js or something like that, some like common utilities. And now you've got your special root files down here, and then your own stuff in the middle. So like it's really hard to see at a glance which files have special meaning to the framework and which files don't. When we do it this way, all of the special root files, they're very visible. At a glance, you can immediately see what's special. And if you look at that and you don't know what it is, then we've given you something very obvious to search for in the SvelteKit docs. Like it's super easy to learn what plus page means because you can just search for it in the SvelteKit docs. And also, if you do the command P palette thing to search for a file, like try that in VS Code and just type plus P. You see your roots like right there in front of you. You can see all of them. So you can see at a glance without, any special dev tooling or anything fancy. Like it's just there in front of you because we're using this very common convention. So honestly, when we first announced that we were going to do this, people went mad. They were so angry at us. They were like, "What are you doing? This is such an inexplicable decision." And then people used it for a while, and almost everyone. There's still a few holdouts, but almost everyone was like, "Oh, I get it. I love this."
I will say it's very much like a who moved my cheese moment where like if you're not familiar with that, it's this idea that like decisions that don't matter, like moving somebody's cheese, will send them through the roof because it's like an unexpected change to your environment, and that for whatever reason makes humans just like absolutely clamp down, like I hate this, don't touch it. But I didn't have any of the rationale because I saw it and I was like, oh, that's interesting. I've never seen that done before. I don't know if I like that. But just in your explanation, honestly, you know what? You did a very similar thing a while back that like instantly changed my mind. So you just instantly changed my mind on this plus convention because I was kind of like, I don't know, that feels a little extra. And now that I know why you did it, I'm like, you know what? That actually makes sense. I think it's a great idea. You did the same thing with tabs versus spaces. Not like maybe a year ago, you put up a tweet that was like, the reasoning for like using tabs over spaces for accessibility concerns, for screen reader concerns, and it makes literally no difference because it's a prettier config setting. And I was like, oh, well, of course I should use tabs. Like, why wouldn't I use tabs? That's a ridiculous thing for me to care about. But prior to that, I was like, well, I'm going to use spaces because screw you, everybody. Like, I like spaces. So, anyways, I guess you've now done that twice in your career where you've instantly changed my mind on something that I thought I had a strong opinion on.
Great. The tabs versus spaces, real hobby horse of mine. I hope that Prettier makes that the default one of these days, but so far they seem quite resistant.
Okay.
Someone just said, of course, it's Robert. Of course, none of this matters in the upcoming AI revolution. Absolutely right. True.
Hands up if Rich convinced you to use tabs. Me. Okay. So with our remaining time, because we don't have a ton of it, I do want to get some data in. So we were looking at Svelte. Let me do the plus page on it to find that now that I know that works. And we'll go to Svelte. And here we are. We're in Svelte.
So on line 7 there, we have something called export let data.
Okay.
Excuse me. And export let is in Svelte 4, that is how you declare a prop. In Svelte 5 with runes, it's a little bit different, but the idea is the same. Our component is essentially a function, and we call it with some data that gets rendered. And that data is provided by the framework. And the framework gets it from your loader. So every pluspage.svelte file can have a sibling file called pluspage.js or pluspage.svelte.js or TS in this case. And the difference between them is your load function in a pluspage.js or TS will run on the server and on the client.
Okay.
Your pluspage.server.ts or JS will only run on the server, and it will send that data to the client so that it can be used interactively.
So whatever the return value of load is will be available in that data prop.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So if I want to do a fetch, I would just run it right here, and then I would return the response as part of my load return value.
You would, although for fetch specifically, because fetch is a browser API and it has context like the current origin and things like that, it behaves a little bit differently on the server. People might have tried doing like a fetch with a relative path or beginning with a slash, and that doesn't work on the server context because you don't have an origin. So to make it a little bit easier to do things with fetch, we actually provide a version of fetch that is optimized for use with SvelteKit. So where you see cookies in the load arguments, if you just add a comma there, in the parameter, and then add a fetch, that is how you would do some fetching.
Okay, so I can I make this async?
You absolutely can.
Okay, so I'm going to await fetch, and we're going to hit, what is the actual, it's the dog CEO API, and they have a random. So here's our random image. What is that? Go away. Then we're going to get this, and I'm going to await my random dog. Wait, what did I just do? So then we're not going to do error handling. So we're just going to get data of await.
So there's a syntax error, by the way. The async needs to be after the yellow parenthesis.
I see. Because are we doing this as a?
The reason for that is at the bottom
we're doing
there
satisfies.
we have this satisfies, so we need to wrap the whole thing in parents for the benefit of TypeScript.
Got it. Okay. So then what I can do is dog image is going to be data. It's message, I think, is what comes back. And we're just gonna roll with that in like the most simple way that I can. And then in here I've got data. So right up at the top of my template, I can add an image of a dog, I think. So let's try it. I'm going to say data dot dog image. Is that what I called it? Random dog. Did I get it right on the first try? Let's find out. I did. I'm a genius. You're all welcome. No, but so now every time we load, we're going to get a different dog. Okay, well that is like brutally simple. I love that. That's beautiful that just works like that. So anything you want to do, you just do. And I assume I can use the regular fetch API if I want, or should I always use the Svelte fetch?
You can use the regular fetch. There's a couple of differences between the provided fetch and the native fetch, which are documented on kit.svelte.dev. But for something like this, it's essentially equivalent.
Excellent. And this is wonderful. Look at that little guy. This is great. Like, this makes a lot of sense to me. I feel like, especially if we go back to the counter, it makes sense to my brain that has no muscle memory for Svelte. And I feel like that's such a good sign when it feels like it's part of the platform model of thinking about things, and not like, because like the Svelte $: is kind of like how when we used to have all the React lifecycle methods where you just, it's like, it's not hard, but it's a lot of stuff you have to learn about exactly how the thing does each thing. But if we're starting to think in terms of a unified model of like signals are basically becoming the default unit of state across frameworks, and there's the state, there's derived values, there are, or derived or computed depending on if you're using like Vue or Svelte or whatever, and then you have effects. And if we can get our heads around those concepts, we can kind of move between frameworks and build great things based on our needs as opposed to based on like which thing we know well enough that we can navigate it. I love that.
And that's a really good encapsulation of both what Svelte is all about in the first place. You know, we are trying to build the framework for people who don't give a shit about frameworks. And that's like largely because of my career background. Like I come from newsrooms where, you know, a lot of the people writing code are not doing so because they're excited about writing code. They're doing so because that is the thing that you have to do to get the end result that you want. And so having a framework that is like as self-explanatory as possible so that you don't constantly need to refer to the documentation or become a framework expert is something that we put a pretty high premium on. But it's also a nice encapsulation of what Svelte 5 specifically is all about. You know, there are certain aspects of Svelte that are not that Svelte-like, if I'm honest. We haven't even talked about some of the other new features that have been added to the Svelte 5 beta. We had a conference last weekend. There's a video, there's docs. We can talk about that another time. But essentially, we're trying to pare the idea of a framework down to the barest essentials, trying to remove all of the incidental complexity, all of the places where you need to have framework-specific knowledge. And we're never going to be able to get to zero framework-specific knowledge. You're always going to have have some knowledge of the thing that you're using, but we want that to be so small that you can learn Svelte in an hour. And if you do that and then you pick it up in a month's time, you'll still know how to use it. That is our sort of North Star with this stuff. And I love so far it's going pretty well. I feel very good about our current direction because we're adding features, but we're reducing the learning curve. And it's pretty rare that you get to do that.
That is really exciting. And I wish I had more time, but unfortunately we are out of time. So I'm going to bring us home. I just dropped another link to the preview into the chat. Let me bring this up on screen for anybody who is not able to see the chat. Also, I'm going to bring up another link to you here. Go find Rich on GitHub, and there's links here to everywhere else that you would need to go. And I'm going to do one more shout out to our sponsors. We've got Netlify and Vetsu Code kicking in cash to make the live captioning work. Thank you to Lee for being here from White Coat Captioning, doing the live captioning. While you're checking out things on the internet, do please make sure that you go over to the Learn with Jason site and check the schedule. We've got just an absolute killer schedule coming up to close out the year. We're going to do some emails with JSX. We're going to learn about distributed identities with Rizel Scarlet. We've got Cassie Evans coming on to teach us some like green sock animation. We're going to have a lot of fun. Make sure you subscribe so that you get the updates of when things are happening, when things are live, and whenever we add something new. Rich, anything you want to send people off toward, any resources I didn't share, anywhere you want them to check out, or just some parting thoughts before we close down for the day?
Yeah, if you like Svelte, if you want to explore Svelte more, then our Discord is the place to go. If you go to svelte.dev/chat, then you'll get an invitation to join our Discord. Svelte.dev, kit.svelte.dev are the websites to check out if you want the documentation. And the main place to get news and updates is via Svelte Society, which is sort of a sister organization to Svelte. Twitter.com/Svelte Society. There's also a YouTube channel, and there's always good stuff happening that Svelte Society is all over. So
big old collection of links there.
Cool. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Rich, thank you so much. This was an absolute blast. I hope to have you back soon because it is always so much fun talking to you about this stuff. But until next time, thank you all for hanging out, and we'll see you next week. Later, y'all.